Commander James Chen stood at attention in the grand crystal hall of the Zaxtherian palace, trying his best not to fidget with his dress uniform's collar. The alien architecture towered above him, spires of translucent crystal catching the light of 3 setting suns. As Earth's first ambassador to this advanced civilization, he knew every move he made was being watched. The Zaxtherian royal court buzzed with activity. Tall, elegant aliens with iridescent skin moved through the hall like living streams of light. Their ceremonial robes flowed behind them, creating patterns that made James's eyes hurt if he looked too long. Ambassador Chen of Earth announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You stand before the royal house of Zaxter." James bowed deeply, just as he had practiced. "I bring greetings from Earth and the United Human Systems." The crowd parted, revealing the royal family. The king and queen sat on crystalline thrones, their skin shimmering with patterns that James had learned indicated deep thought. But it was their daughter, Princess Cthera, who caught his attention. Unlike the other Zaxtherians, whose movements were carefully controlled, the princess practically bounded forward. Her skin flickered with rapid colors: purple, blue, gold. Emotions that James hadn't learned to read yet. She circled him once, twice, her head tilted in curiosity. "Fascinating," she said, her translator making her voice sound musical. "You're shorter than I expected, but your biomass density is remarkable." James maintained his diplomatic smile, even as sweat formed on his brow. This wasn't in any of the briefings. The princess stopped directly in front of him. Her skin settled into a deep, pulsing red that made the other Zaxtherians gasp. Before anyone could react, she pointed at James and declared in a voice that echoed through the hall, "You will share my bed tonight, human." The crystal hall erupted into chaos. The king's skin turned almost black with shock. The queen's patterns became so erratic that her attendants rushed to support her. Human diplomatic staff started frantically checking their translators, sure there had been some mistake. James stood frozen, his years of diplomatic training deserting him. Nothing had prepared him for this. He looked to his chief advisor, Sarah Martinez, who could only shrug helplessly. Princess Cthera seemed delighted by the chaos. Her skin rippled with satisfied patterns as she moved closer to James. "Our species are compatible enough," she announced to the stunned crowd. "I've studied the medical data extensively." The king finally found his voice. "Daughter, this is not how we—" "The ancient laws are clear," Cthera interrupted. "Royal mate choice is sacred and absolute. Or are you suggesting we ignore our most holy traditions, Father?" James finally managed to speak. "Your Highness, I'm not sure you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly, Commander Chen," she said, her skin now showing patterns he recognized as amusement. "And I think you'll find this arrangement beneficial for both our peoples." As the diplomatic crisis unfolded around him, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The princess's eyes held a calculating intelligence that suggested this was more than a mere impulse. He was right. This was only the beginning. James sat in his temporary quarters, head in his hands, while his diplomatic team argued around him. The past 12 hours had been a blur of emergency meetings, frantic calls to Earth, and increasingly bizarre cultural briefings. "The situation is delicate," Sarah Martinez explained, pacing the room. "Refusing a royal mate choice isn't just an insult. It's considered an attack on their most sacred traditions." "But why me?" James looked up. "And why now?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Vikstall, their Zaxtherian cultural advisor, entered the room. His skin showed patterns of scientific curiosity. "You're an anomaly, Commander Chen," he said, setting up a holographic display. "Every species we've encountered responds to our pheromone-based attraction systems, except humans." The display showed complex molecular structures. "Our nobility uses these pheromones to ensure compatible mate selection. But your biology," he gestured, and the display showed human DNA. "It's completely unaffected." "Is that why the princess chose me?" James asked. Dr. Vixtel's skin flickered with what James had learned was amusement. Partially. Princess Cthera has always been rebellious. You're the first potential mate she's met who can truly choose her for herself, not because of biological manipulation. Great, James muttered. I'm a political statement. A new alert flashed on their screens. Princess Cthera was requesting his presence in the royal gardens. Alone. The gardens were unlike anything on Earth. Crystalline plants caught and refracted light, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the paths. The princess sat beside a fountain that seemed to flow upward, defying gravity. You're troubled, she said as he approached. Her skin showed genuine concern. Your Highness. Thera, she corrected. And before you continue, you should know something. My announcement wasn't just impulse or rebellion. She stood, her movements graceful despite her obvious agitation. 3 rival houses are pushing for marriage alliances. All of them want to use our pheromone bonds to control the throne. But you, her skin rippled with hope. You're immune. You can think clearly, act freely. James felt a headache coming on. So I'm your political shield. You're my chance at genuine choice, she countered. And Earth's chance at a real alliance, not just pretty diplomatic words. Before James could respond, her skin suddenly shifted to alert patterns. Someone's coming. They're using scrambling tech to hide their presence. James tensed, years of military training kicking in. Is that normal? Thera's skin had gone almost white, a warning color. No, and they're not supposed to be in the royal gardens. The crystalline plants around them began to shatter. The medical bay hummed with alien technology as doctors fussed over James and Cthera. After the attack in the gardens, the princess had insisted on a full examination of both of them. What they discovered would change everything. Fascinating. The chief medical officer's skin pulsed with excitement. Commander Chen, your immune system didn't just resist the crystal fragments. It's actively breaking them down. James watched as a holographic display showed his blood cells attacking the crystalline shards that had embedded in his arm during the garden attack. Is that unusual? Unusual? Cthera laughed. It's impossible. Those crystals are bioengineered to be indestructible. They're what our buildings are made from. The medical officer continued scanning. And your muscle density and our gravity. You're operating at only 40% effort while moving normally. In an emergency situation, he could probably throw one of our royal guards across the room. Cthera finished, her skin showing patterns of delight. More doctors gathered, bringing results from different tests. Each revelation seemed to excite them more. James's ability to process foods toxic to Zaxtherians, his enhanced healing rate in their atmosphere, even his primitive nervous system that made him immune to their most advanced bioweapons. Your species evolved on a death world, one doctor explained. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, constant biological warfare from microscopic organisms. It made you remarkably adaptable. Thera moved closer to James, her skin showing new patterns he hadn't seen before. And your mind. Tell them about Earth's historical warfare. James described basic military tactics, guerrilla warfare, and the concept of asymmetric combat. The Zaxtherian military advisors who had joined them looked increasingly disturbed. You developed these strategies without AI assistance, one asked, using only biological neural networks. We call it human intuition, James said with a shrug. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Cthera's skin suddenly shifted to decision patterns. This is why I chose you, not just for political protection, but because your people have something we've lost, the ability to adapt, to think differently. The medical bay fell silent as she made her announcement. I'm declaring Commander Chen my official consort candidate. Any objections will be taken as a direct challenge to the crown. As the doctors and advisors rushed to process this declaration, James caught a glimpse of his reflection in a crystal panel. He was smiling. Somehow, in all this chaos, he'd started enjoying himself. The game was changing, and humanity's supposed weaknesses were becoming their greatest strengths. The grand banquet hall of the Zaxtherian Palace sparkled under crystalline chandeliers. James adjusted his formal uniform as he watched Thera greet nobles from various houses. The royal celebration was meant to formally announce their courtship, but something felt off. "Your pheromone suppressors are working perfectly," Dr. Vikstall whispered, checking a scanner, "though you hardly need them, given your natural immunity." James nodded, his military training keeping him alert despite the festive atmosphere. He'd noticed several nobles wearing ceremonial daggers that seemed unnecessarily sharp for decoration. Thera approached their table, her skin glowing with official greeting patterns. But as she reached for her ceremonial wine glass, James caught a subtle shift in the liquid's color, something his mandatory diplomatic poison recognition training had covered. Without hesitation, he knocked the glass from her hand. "Don't drink." The hall fell silent. Thera's skin flashed with surprise, then understanding as her own sensors detected the toxin. But James was already moving, pulling her down as energy weapons discharged from hidden locations in the hall's crystal architecture. "Primitive human," a voice boomed. "You cannot hope to outmaneuver Zaxtherian military technology." James grinned, adrenaline pumping. "Watch me." He grabbed a decorative crystal plate, using its reflective surface to identify shooter positions. The lower gravity of the Zaxtherian world turned his next move into an Olympic-worthy display as he leaped over a table, using it as cover. The bioweapon should have incapacitated him. Someone shouted in panic. "Humans evolved alongside microscopic killers." Thera called out proudly as she activated her personal shields. "Did you really think your designer toxins could match Earth's natural arsenal?" James moved with unexpected speed, his Earth-evolved muscles proving devastatingly effective in the lower gravity. He disarmed 3 attackers before they could adjust their targeting systems to his unpredictable movement patterns. Thera fought alongside him, her royal combat training complementing his military experience. Together, they made an unstoppable team. Her advanced technology, and his intuitive combat skills. When palace security finally arrived, they found the assassination team thoroughly subdued. James stood protectively near Thera, slightly winded but otherwise unharmed. "Impossible," one of the captured assassins muttered. "Our simulation showed a 99.9% success rate. You forgot to account for human unpredictability," Thera said, her skin showing proud patterns. She turned to James, adding more softly, "and loyalty." As medical teams rushed in, James realized something had changed. Thera wasn't just looking at him as a political shield anymore, and he wasn't just seeing her as a diplomatic assignment. Sometimes the best partnerships came from surviving impossible odds together. The investigation room deep within the palace hummed with tension. James stood before a holographic display showing connections between noble houses, while Thera paced, her skin flickering with intense focus patterns. The assassination attempt was too well coordinated, James said, pointing to key data points. Multiple access codes, inside knowledge of security protocols. This goes deeper than rival houses. But our AI analysis shows no clear pattern, Thera replied, frustration evident in her skin's rapid color shifts. James smiled. "That's because we're thinking like Zaxtherians. Let's try something more human." He pulled out an old-fashioned notebook and pen, drawing surprised looks from the royal investigators. Sometimes the oldest methods work best. "Tell me about the servants who had access to the banquet hall." For the next several hours, they combined Earth's primitive detective work with Zaxtherian technology. James's handwritten notes and diagrams started revealing patterns that the AI had missed, patterns only visible to a mind evolved to find prey and avoid predators. "Look here," he said, pointing to his rough sketches. "These 3 houses always appear in the background, never directly involved, but always benefiting from the chaos." Thera's skin pulsed with revelation. House Vexthor, Mirathi, and Kolzar. They've been pushing for AI governance, claiming biological rulers are too unpredictable. And what could be more unpredictable than a human-Zaxtherian alliance? James added. The evidence trail led them through encrypted databases and ancient traditions. Using James's intuitive approach combined with Cthera's deep knowledge of Zaxtherian politics, they uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of their society. They wanted to replace the royal family with AI rulers. Cthera said, her skin showing patterns of both anger and sadness. All these years of tradition reduced to algorithms. James placed a hand on her shoulder, an unusually intimate gesture for their species. Sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the right one. Humanity learned it the hard way. Cthera's skin shifted to a pattern he'd never seen before, one that made the other Zaxtherians in the room gasp. What's wrong? He asked. That's the pattern of absolute trust, Dr. Vikstall whispered. It hasn't been seen in the royal family for generations. Looking at their collected evidence, James realized they'd done more than solve a crime. They'd proven that the combination of human intuition and Zaxtherian technology was more powerful than either alone. Now they just had to convince an entire civilization. The Great Hall of Voices was packed with thousands of Zaxtherians, their skin creating a shifting sea of colors as Princess Cthera took the central platform. James stood nearby, his presence causing waves of whispered conversations. My people, Cthera began, her voice carrying through the crystalline acoustics. For generations, we've prided ourselves on biological superiority, our pheromone bonds, our technological integration, our perfect society. Her skin shifted to truth-telling patterns. But we've become stagnant. Gasps echoed through the hall. Such direct criticism was unprecedented. Look at our human allies, she continued, gesturing to James. They survived a world that tried to kill them daily. Instead of engineering perfect solutions, they adapted. Where we see primitive biology, they have strength. Where we see chaos, they'd find creativity. She activated a holographic display, showing the evidence of the AI conspiracy. Some would replace us with machines, claiming biological rulers are too unpredictable. But it's our very unpredictability, our ability to evolve and adapt, that makes us strong. James stepped forward, drawing more murmurs from the crowd. On Earth, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Your technology is incredible, but technology without biological intuition is just mathematics. A young noble stood up. But our traditions, Cthera interrupted, were meant to protect us, not chain us. The sacred mate choice was created to ensure strong leaders, not to trap us in predetermined paths. Her skin began displaying new patterns, ones never seen before. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as colors shifted in ways their biology hadn't thought possible. I choose James Chen not because of pheromones or political advantage, but because together we represent something new. Human adaptability with Zaxtherian advancement, intuition with technology, choice with tradition. The younger Zaxtherian skin began showing similar new patterns, their biology already adapting to new possibilities. The older nobles watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as centuries of tradition began to evolve before their eyes. The universe is vast, Cthera concluded, and we can no longer afford to believe we've reached perfection. It's time to adapt, to grow, to choose our own path forward. The hall erupted in a display of colors so bright that James had to shield his eyes. Change had come to Zaxthir, and there was no turning back. 1 year later, the Zaxtherian palace gleamed under its 3 suns as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for an unprecedented event. The first human Zaxtherian union was about to be formalized, but not in the traditional way. James stood in ceremonial dress that blended Earth military honors with Zaxtherian royal symbols. Beside him, Cthera's skin displayed a complex pattern that combined all the colors they'd discovered together over the past year. The old laws called for biological bonding, Cthera announced to the assembled crowd. But we're creating something new, a partnership of choice, not chemistry. The ceremony combined Earth's marriage traditions with Zaxtherian customs. Instead of the traditional pheromone-binding ritual, they exchanged vows, promises made by choice, not biological imperative. "You once demanded I share your bed," James said, drawing laughs from those who remembered that first shocking announcement. "Instead, we're sharing a future." The changes were visible throughout the palace. Young Zaxtherians displayed new skin patterns that developed through prolonged exposure to human unpredictability. The royal guard now trained in both advanced technology and primitive hand-to-hand combat. Even the palace AI had been reprogrammed to incorporate human-style creative problem-solving. "The conspiracy to replace us with machines failed," Thera addressed the gathering, "because they didn't understand that perfection isn't about eliminating flaws. It's about adapting, growing, choosing to be better." As they completed their vows, Thera's skin shifted to that rare pattern of absolute trust. But this time, James's biomonitors showed his body responding with similar chemical changes. Somehow, their species were adapting to each other. "You will share our future, human," Thera said, echoing her first declaration, but with new meaning. "Not because of biology or politics, but because we choose it." The hall erupted in celebration as human and Zaxtherian customs blended seamlessly. Earth dances were performed with alien grace, while traditional Zaxtherian color ceremonies incorporated human music. Dr. Vixtal approached the couple, his skin showing excitement. "We're detecting new neural patterns in both species. This union isn't just symbolic, you're actually evolving together." James laughed. "Maybe that's the greatest human trait of all. We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to understand." As the three suns set, casting rainbow lights through the crystal palace, James and Thera stood together, living proof that the greatest strengths sometimes come from what others see as weaknesses. The universe was changing, and humanity's primitive nature had helped spark a revolution of choice over destiny, of adaptation over perfection. And it all started with one princess's impulsive demand.